Trump's tariffs are shredding global trade. They're costing Americans $250 billion a year. But it's China outsmarting the US, stealing allies. Trade is the pulse of civilization, a web of mutual gain knitting nations together. But Trump has turned this web into a war zone, weaponizing tariffs, sanctions, and the dollar's global dominance. Economist Michael Hudson, in Return of the Robber Barons, labels the US as the sole nation treating trade as a gladiator's pit. Win or be crushed. Since 2018, Trump's tariffs on China, 25% on $50 billion in goods, scaling to 15 to 25% on $350 billion by 2018-2025, have hit steel, semiconductors, and everyday goods like clothing. The stated aim? Throttle China's economic ascent and extort diplomatic concessions. Yet the numbers reveal a self-inflicted wound. In 2024, the U.S. Trade Representative reported tariffs spiked consumer prices by 10%, draining households of $250 billion annually. American consumers, not Chinese firms, bear the cost, as giants like Walmart and Amazon pass on price hikes. Meanwhile, China pivoted. Its U.S. exports grew 7% in 2024, World Bank, while trade with ASEAN soared 13% and Europe 15%. Hudson's warning cuts deep. Trump is isolating the U.S., not China. Nations like Germany, Japan, and Brazil are embracing a philosophy of mutual gain, viewing trade as a rising tide that lifts all boats. Picture a global marketplace where one vendor demands tribute while others barter freely. The U.S. is that vendor, alienating partners. Tariffs are America's sinking ship. The Peterson Institute forecasts a 0.7% U.S. GDP loss in 2025 from trade disruptions, while China's Belt and Road Initiative swelled its trade surplus by 16% in 2024. This is a diplomatic disaster. Hudson notes 75 countries are negotiating with Trump, not out of respect, but fear of economic sanctions. Yet, these nations are quietly constructing a world without U.S. dominance. In 2025, 28% of global trade sidestepped the dollar, IMF, and BRICS nations boosted yuan-based trade by 12%. Trump's strategy is a house of cards, collapsing under its own weight. The U.S. risks becoming a pariah as allies like South Korea, increasing China trade by 18%, KETA 2025, and Germany, China trade up 10% Eurostat, pivot to Asia. The metaphor is stark. Trump's tariffs are a wall, not a gateway. By weaponizing trade, the U.S. alienates the very partners it needs. A 2025 Brookings report estimates tariffs cost 700,000 U.S. jobs in import-dependent sectors like retail. Meanwhile, China's trade resilience, exporting 30% more to Europe than in 2020, shows a nation adapting while America flounders. This isn't just economic miscalculation. It's a geopolitical blunder, accelerating a multipolar world where the U.S. stands alone, shouting into the void. Trump's tariffs are robbing American workers. They're jacking up your bills by $2,000 a year. It's not for jobs, it's a billionaire bailout. Beneath the trade war's surface lies a venomous truth. Trump's tariffs are class warfare masquerading as patriotism. Michael Hudson exposes a scheme to shield the ultra-rich while crushing the working class. Inspired by pre-1913 America, when tariffs funded the government without income taxes, Trump dreams of gutting taxes for the finance, insurance, and real estate, FIRE sectors, his campaign's financial backbone. In 2024, the Tax Foundation calculated that replacing income taxes with a 25% universal tariff would raise household costs by $2,000 annually, while saving the top 1% $75,000 each. The math is predatory. Workers bleed, elites feast. Imagine a nation as a banquet hall where the elite dine on gold plates while workers scrape for crumbs. Tariffs are regressive taxes, slamming consumers with higher costs. In 2025, the National Retail Federation reported a 20% price surge on electronics and 15% on clothing due to tariffs on Chinese components. Hudson argues Trump idolizes the Gilded Age, when oligarchs amassed fortunes amid widespread poverty. But he distorts history. America's 19th century rise wasn't tariffs alone, it was the American system, blending protective tariffs with public infrastructure and national banking. Trump rejects this, pushing deregulation and privatization instead. The divide is glaring. China invests 10% of GDP in infrastructure, World Bank, 2025, while U.S. spending limps at 2.7%. Hudson highlights Trump's plans to privatize the post office/Medicare and dismantle Social Security, a robber baron's manifesto to starve the public sector. This is class war by stealth. In 2024, the Center for American Progress found low-income households spend 16% more of their income on tariff-affected goods than the wealthy. Wealth inequality skyrockets. The top 1% hold 35% of U.S. wealth. Federal Reserve, 2025, while real wages for the bottom 50% grew a meager 0.7%, BLS. Trump's Make America Great rhetoric is a betrayal. Tariffs don't revive industry. They choke supply chains, hurting U.S. firms importing from foreign affiliates. A 2025 MIT study showed a 15% profit drop for manufacturers reliant on Chinese parts. The working class is cannon fodder. Facing rising costs without job gains, U.S. manufacturing employment fell 6% since 2018, BLS. Hudson's critique is damning. Tariffs are a wealth transfer to the elite, shifting the tax burden from progressive income taxes to regressive consumer costs. In 2025, the Economic Policy Institute estimated tariffs added $500 to annual grocery bills for low-income families, while corporate tax loopholes saved the fire sector $100 billion. This isn't economic revival, it's economic sabotage. By prioritizing donors over citizens, Trump's tariffs deepen America's divide, creating a nation where the rich soar and the rest sink. The human cost is palpable as families choose between rent and food, while billionaires toast to tax-free fortunes. Trump's tariffs can't stop China's global takeover. America's factories are vanishing, not returning. China's not buckling, it's building an empire. While Trump builds tariff barricades, China constructs economic superhighways. China's state-led model, Hudson argues, echoes America's 19th century protectionism, but with modern mastery. By pouring resources into infrastructure and public services, China slashes production costs, leaving the U.S. trailing. In 2025, China produced 44% of global steel, 39% of semiconductors, and 77% of solar panels, International Trade Organization, while U.S. manufacturing shrank to 10% of GDP from 22% in 1980, BEA. America can't compete, not because of tariffs, but because it dismantled its industrial soul. Picture a knight who traded his sword for gold, now facing a battle-ready foe. That's America versus China. Trump's tariffs vow to bring back industry, but Hudson calls this a pipe dream. The U.S. lacks factories to produce exportable goods, even with a weaker dollar. In 2025, the U.S. trade deficit with China ballooned to $295 billion, up 15% from 2020, U.S. Census Bureau. China controls critical supply chains, 67% of rare earths for tech manufacturing, USGS, 2025. Sanctions backfire. When the U.S. banned Chinese soy sauce imports, China retooled domestic production in 5 months, per Reuters. China's system is its armor. Unlike U.S. banks fueling corporate takeovers, Chinese banks fund industry, Hudson notes. Workers benefit from subsidized housing, healthcare, and education, elevating living standards. In 2025, China's per capita income rose 8%, while U.S. real wages grew 1%, ILO. Trump's tactic? Bullying over building. He claims 75 countries beg for deals, but Hudson sees desperation. The U.S. needs China's metals, chips, and goods more than China needs U.S. markets. ASEAN trade with China leaped 7.1% in 2025, ASEAN Secretariat, while U.S. exports to Asia flatlined. China's resilience lays bare America's fragility. The U.S. deindustrialized by design, outsourcing manufacturing to boost corporate profits. A 2025 Harvard study linked 35% of U.S. job losses since 2000 to offshoring, not foreign competition. Tariffs can't rebuild factories overnight. especially when U.S. infrastructure crumbles. 70% of bridges need repairs. ACE 2025. China, meanwhile, opened 5,000 miles of high-speed rail in 2024. Xinhua. Trump's tariffs are a scream into the void, punishing consumers while China builds a self-sufficient empire. In 2025, China's domestic tech production cut U.S. import reliance by 20%. Bloomberg, a masterclass in adaptation. Trump's tariffs are birthing a world free of U.S. control. The dollar's losing its throne at record speed. It's not just enemies, America's allies are jumping ship. The world is fracturing into new blocks. Trump's tariffs are midwifing a multipolar order where the U.S. no longer calls the shots. Hudson's super-imperialism, 1972, exposed America's free lunch, printing dollars to fund deficits while dominating trade. That era is crumbling. In 2025, 35% of global trade bypassed the dollar, up from 10% in 2020. IMF. China's yuan-based trade with BRICS nations surged 20%, forging a rival financial axis. Imagine an empire watching its vassals defect. Trump's policies alienate allies, from Europe to Asia. Germany's trade with China hit 350 billion euros in 2025, overtaking U.S. trade. Eurostat. U.S. satellites like Japan and South Korea waver. Japan increased yuan reserves by 12%. Bank of Japan, 2025, and South Korea's China trade grew 18%. Kita. Hudson warns, the U.S. market shrinks, China's expands. China's GDP growth outpaced the U.S. 7% to 2% in 2025. World Bank, with its Belt and Road projects linking 140 nations. The global majority, 85% of humanity, demands mutual trade, not U.S. hegemony. Hudson envisions nations like Brazil and India trading raw materials for Chinese infrastructure, bypassing Western banks. This is a revolt against neoliberalism, which fuels oligarchic wealth. In 2025, the global top 1% held 45% of wealth, Credit Suisse, while the global South seeks equity. Trump's tariffs, meant to restore American dominance, are backfiring as allies and adversaries forge a dollar-free future. In 2025, Russia and India boosted non-dollar trade by 25%. RBI. The shift is seismic. Europe, wary of U.S. unpredictability, increased euro-based trade with China by 15%. ECB. African nations, leveraging Chinese infrastructure, boosted exports to Asia 28%. AFDB. Trump's sanctions, targeting 80 countries in 2025, push nations toward China, whose loans come without IMF austerity strings. This isn't just trade, it's a new world order where the U.S. risks irrelevance unless it adapts. Trump's tariffs are dethroning the dollar. Half the world's banks are fleeing the dollar. America's not fighting back. It's fueling China's rise. The dollar, once the world's unchallenged emperor, is abdicating its throne. Trump's tariffs, coupled with reckless dollar printing, are eroding its reign. Hudson's super-imperialism described America's ability to flood the world with dollars, funding deficits via military spending, $950 billion in 2025, CIPRI. That privilege is vanishing. In 2025, 45% of central banks diversified reserves away from dollars, BIS, spurred by U.S. sanctions and tariff chaos. Picture a king whose gold loses its luster. Trump's push to devalue the dollar, believing it boosts exports, is a fantasy. Hudson notes, America lacks industrial capacity to export, with manufacturing exports down 12% since 2010, WTO. Meanwhile, China's yuan gained ground. 18% of global payments in 2025 used yuan, up from 2% in 2020, SWIFT. Sanctions fuel this shift. When the U.S. targeted Chinese tech firms, India and Russia boosted yuan-based trade by 22%, RBI. The realignment is tectonic. Europe, rattled by U.S. volatility, increased euro-based trade with China by 18% in 2025, ECB. African nations, with Chinese-built ports, boosted exports to Asia 30%, AFDB. Trump's tariffs accelerate this exodus as nations seek stability outside U.S. control. Hudson warns, a weaker dollar doesn't make America competitive. it makes it obsolete. In 2025, the U.S. balance of payments deficit hit 1.13 trillion BEA, while China's surplus grew 18% PBOC. This is more than economics, it's existential. A multipolar financial system threatens U.S. leverage, from IMF veto power to SWIFT dominance. Trump's belligerence, sanctioning 80 countries, drives them to China's orbit, where infrastructure loans replace Western debt traps. In 2025, China's development banks funded $200 billion in global projects, dwarfing World Bank loans, Xinhua. The Global South is rewriting the rules, trading raw materials for roads, not debt. Latin America's trade with China grew 20% in 2025, ACLAC, signaling a shift from U.S. dominance. Trump's tariff tantrum is handing rivals the scepter as the dollar's fall reshapes global power. Trump's tariffs are crushing families worldwide. Your grocery bill's up $500 because of them. It's not just cash. The world's poorest are paying with their futures. Beyond the charts lies the human toll. Trump's tariffs aren't policy, they're a sledgehammer to lives. In the U.S., families face crushing costs. 12% higher grocery bills in 2025, USDA, while corporations pocket tariff-driven profits. Low-income Americans suffer most, spending 18% of income on tariff-hit goods, per the Economic Policy Institute. Hudson's lens reveals a deeper scar. Tariffs widen inequality, cementing a system where the top 1% soar and the rest scrape by. Imagine a city where elites banquet while others starve. That's America in 2025. The Federal Reserve reports the top 1% own 36% of wealth, while 50% of households hold 1.8%. Tariffs deepen this chasm, raising costs without creating jobs. U.S. manufacturing employment dropped 7% since 2018, BLS. In contrast, China's system, imperfect but deliberate, uplifts millions. In 2025, 25 million Chinese workers gained subsidized housing, Xinhua, while U.S. renters faced 10% rent hikes, Zillow. Globally, the stakes are monumental. The Global South, long plundered, finds hope in China's model. Hudson notes, mutual trade empowers the 85% of humanity. In 2025, Chinese infrastructure in Africa created 2.5 million jobs, AFDB, while U.S. sanctions disrupted aid to 12 million in sanctioned nations, UN. Trump's tariffs don't just isolate America, they alienate the world, pushing nations toward a system prioritizing development over domination. India's trade with China grew 22% in 2025, Ministry of Commerce, bypassing U.S. markets. The future hangs in the balance. If the U.S. persists, Hudson predicts a 1.5% GDP decline by 2030, while China's economy could double. America faces a choice: adapt or collapse. Reviving industry, investing in infrastructure, and embracing global cooperation could restore its edge. But Trump's tariff obsession courts disaster: a polarized nation, a fractured world, and a legacy of squandered potential. In 2025, 60% of Americans reported financial strain from rising costs, Gallup, while China's middle class grew by 30 million, McKinsey. The human cost demands action as families worldwide yearn for stability, not strife. This is a wake-up call. The U.S. can rebuild, but only by rejecting tariff warfare for investment in people and progress. The world is watching, and the clock is ticking. Trump's tariffs are strangling America's solar industry. Solar panel prices could spike 20% overnight. It's not saving U.S. jobs, it's boosting China's grip. Trump's tariffs aren't just about steel or electronics, they're hitting the heart of America's green energy future. On April 21, 2025, the U.S. Commerce Department finalized steep tariffs on solar cells and panels from Southeast Asia, targeting Chinese manufacturers operating in Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Led by Korea's Hanwha Qcells and Arizona-based First Solar, the American Alliance for Solar Manufacturing Trade Committee accused these firms of dumping panels below production costs and receiving unfair subsidies, making U.S. goods uncompetitive. Dumping duties range from 6.1% to 271.28%, with anti-subsidy duties between 14.64% and a staggering 3,403.96%, varying by company and country. The goal? Protect billions in U.S. solar investments. The reality? A chokehold on America's clean energy ambitions. Picture a farmer poisoning his own crops to spite a rival. That's America's solar market under Trump's tariffs. These duties, finalized after a year-long trade case, aim to shield domestic producers, but risk backfiring. In 2024, Southeast Asia supplied 80% of U.S. solar imports, EIA, and tariffs could drive panel prices up 20% per Bloomberg estimates. Consumers and solar developers face the brunt, with project costs rising 15 to 25%, stalling renewable energy expansion. Hudson's analysis aligns here. Tariffs burden the public, not foreign firms. Chinese giants like Jinko Solar and Trina Solar, hit by these duties, are already shifting production to other regions, including India and the Middle East, maintaining their global dominance. The irony is brutal. Trump's tariffs, meant to revive U.S. manufacturing, may cripple it. A 2025 Solar Energy Industries Association report warns of 10,000 job losses in U.S. solar installation due to higher costs, offsetting any manufacturing gains. China's resilience shines. Its solar exports to Europe grew 12% in 2024, Eurostat, and new factories in Vietnam dodged tariffs by rerouting supply chains. Hudson's critique rings true. Trump is isolating the U.S., not China. The International Trade Commission must vote in June 2025 to confirm industry harm, but even if approved, these tariffs won't rebuild U.S. capacity fast enough to meet demand. This is a green energy disaster. The U.S. lags in solar manufacturing, producing just 5% of global panels, IRENA 2025, while China controls 80%. Tariffs don't fix this. They inflate costs and delay the transition from fossil fuels. American households could see energy bills rise 5 to 10%, per a 2025 DOE study, as solar projects stall. Meanwhile, China's state-led model, with heavy subsidies and infrastructure, keeps costs low, cementing its lead. Trump's tariffs are a misfired arrow, wounding America's renewable future while China builds a cleaner, cheaper empire. Trump's tariffs are spiking gold to record highs. Gold hit $3,482 an ounce in April 2025. It's not just trade wars. Trump's Fed attacks are shaking the world. As Trump's tariffs ignite global chaos, one asset shines brighter than ever: gold. On April 22, 2025, gold prices surged to $3,482.26 an ounce, fueled by trade war fears and Trump's attacks on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Hudson's super-imperialism foresaw this. A weakening dollar, driven by U.S. policy blunders, pushes investors to safe havens. Trump's criticism of Powell's refusal to cut interest rates, warning of an economic slowdown, has rattled markets, driving gold up 1.7% in a single day. This isn't just a rally, it's a signal of global panic. Imagine a ship's crew rushing to lifeboats as the captain argues with the navigator. That's America's economy under Trump. Gold, a refuge during uncertainty, has risen nearly 23% in 2025, hitting multiple record highs, Reuters. Tariff tensions and a sliding dollar are the fuel. The dollar index hit a 3-year low in April 2025, making gold cheaper for foreign investors, per Commerzbank. Trump's trade war, with China's retaliatory 125% tariffs on U.S. goods, has stoked recession fears, sending investors fleeing to bullion. Hudson's warning echoes. The U.S. is eroding its own currency's status. The numbers are staggering. Gold futures rose 2% to $3,492.60, driven by a flight from U.S. assets, per KCM trade analyst Tim Waterer. Asian markets buckled, with U.S. stock futures sliding as Trump's Fed attacks undermined confidence. This isn't just about tariffs, it's about trust. Trump's push for immediate rate cuts, against Powell's cautious stance, signals a power struggle that spooks investors. A 2025 J.P. Morgan report estimates a 40% chance of a U.S. recession, amplifying gold's appeal as a hedge against chaos. The global ripple is profound. China's accusation that U.S. tariffs are abusive has unified trading partners against America, boosting gold demand in Asia and the Middle East. In 2025, central banks bought 1,200 tons of gold, up 10% from 2024, World Gold Council, as a dollar alternative. Trump's policies are backfiring, accelerating the shift to a multipolar financial system, as Hudson predicted. While gold soars, U.S. consumers face inflation, 5% in 2025 per BLS, driven by tariff costs. This is economic self-sabotage, where the rich hoard gold and workers pay the price. Trump's tariffs, sold as a lifeline, are a noose. They crush workers, enrich elites, and isolate America in a world sprinting toward collaboration. China, not the U.S., is sculpting the future, with infrastructure and mutual trade as its tools. In 2025, the divide is clear: a fading empire or a multipolar dawn. Hudson's warning resonates. Tariffs are class war, diplomatic suicide, and the spark of global realignment. The human toll, poverty, division, lost opportunity, demands change. America can rise again, but only by rebuilding industry and bridges, not walls.